The Dharma Bums. Chapter 6. Now came the time for our big mountain climb. Jaffe came over in late afternoon on his bike to get me. We took out Alva's knapsack and put it in his bike basket. I took out socks and sweaters, but I had no climbing shoes, and the only things that could serve were Jaffe's tennis sneakers, old but firm. My own shoes were too floppy and torn. That might be better, Ray. With sneakers your feet are light and you can jump from boulder to boulder with no trouble. Of course we'll swap shoes at certain times and make it. What about food? What are you bringing? Well, before I tell you about food, Ray, sometimes he called me by my first name, and always when he did so it was a long drawn out sad Ray, as though he was worried about my welfare. I've got your sleeping bag. It's not a duck down like my own, and naturally a lot heavier, but with clothes on and a good big fire you'll be comfortable up there. Clothes on, yeah, but why a big fire? It's only October. Yeah, but it's below freezing up there, Ray. In October, he said sadly. At night? Yeah, at night, and in the daytime it's real warm and pleasant. You know old John Muir used to go up to those mountains where we're going with nothing but his old army coat and a paper bag full of dried bread, and he slept in his coat and just soaked the old bread in water when he wanted to eat, and he roamed around like that for months before tramping back to the city. My goodness, he must have been tough. Now, as for food, I went down to Market Street to the Crystal Palace Market and bought my favorite dry cereal, bulgur, which is a kind of Bulgarian cracked rough wheat, and I'm going to stick pieces of bacon in it, little square chunks. That'll make a fine supper for all three of us, Morley and us. And I'm bringing tea. You always want a good cup of hot tea under those cold stars, and I'm bringing real chocolate pudding that I'll bring to a boil and stir over the fire, and then let it cool ice cold in the snow. Oh boy! So instead of rice this time, which I usually bring, I thought I'd make a nice delicacy for you, Ray. And in the bulgur, too. I'm going to throw in all kinds of dried diced vegetables I bought at the ski shop. We'll have our supper and breakfast out of this, and for energy food, this big bag of peanuts and raisins, and another bag with dried apricot and dried prunes, ought to fix us for the rest. And he showed me the very tiny bag in which all this important food for 3 grown men for 24 hours or more climbing at high altitudes was stored. The main thing in going to mountains is to keep the weight down as far as possible. Those packs get heavy. But my God, there's not enough food in that little bag. Yes, there is. The water swells it up. Do we bring wine? No, it isn't any good up there, and once you're at a high altitude and tired, you don't crave alcohol. I didn't believe this, but said nothing. We put my own things on a bike and walked across the campus to his place, pushing the bike along the edge of the sidewalk. It was a cool, clear Arabian night dusk, with the tower clock of University of Cal, a clean black shadow against a backdrop of cypress and eucalyptus and all kinds of trees, bells ringing somewhere, the air crisp. It's going to be cold up there, said Jaffe, but he was feeling fine that night and laughed when I asked him about next Thursday with Princess. You know, we played Yab-Yum twice more since that last night. She comes over to my shack any day or night, any minute, and man, she won't take no for an answer. So I satisfy the bodhisattva. And Jaffe wanted to talk about everything, his boyhood in Oregon. You know, my mother and father and sister were living a real primitive life on that log cabin farm, and on odd winter mornings we'd all undress and dress in front of the fire. We had to. That's why I'm not like you about undressing. I mean, I'm not bashful or anything like that. What did you used to do around college? In the summers, I was always a government fire lookout. That's what you ought to do next summer, Smith. And in the winters, I did a lot of skiing and used to walk around the campus on crutches real proud. I climbed some pretty big mountains up there, including the long haul up Rainier, almost to the top where you sign your name. I finally made it one year. There are only a few names up there, you know, and I climbed all around the Cascades off-season and in-season, and worked as a logger. Smith, I gotta tell you about the romance of Northwest logging. Like, you keep talking about railroading. You should have seen the little narrow gauge railways up there, and those cold winter mornings with snow on your belly, full of pancakes and syrup and black coffee. Boy, and you raise your double-bitted axe to your morning's first log. There's nothing like it. That's just like my dream of the great Northwest. The Cowakiutul Indians, the Northwest Mountain Police. Well, they're in Canada. They got 'em. Over in British Columbia. I used to meet some on the trail. We pushed the bike down past the various college hangouts and cafeterias, and looked into Robbie's to see if we knew anybody. Alva was in there, working his part-time job as busboy. Jaffe and I were kind of outlandish looking on the campus in our old clothes. In fact, Jaffe was considered an eccentric around the campus, which is the usual thing for campuses and college people to think whenever a real man appears on the scene. Colleges being nothing but grooming schools for the middle-class non-identity, which usually finds its perfect expression on the outskirts of the campus, in rows of well-to-do houses with lawns and television sets in each living room, with everybody looking at the same thing and thinking the same thing at the same time, while the Jaffes of the world go prowling in the wilderness to hear the voice crying in the wilderness, to find the ecstasy of the stars, to find the dark, mysterious secret of the origin of faceless, wonderless, crapulous civilization. All these people, said Jaffe, they all got white-tiled toilets and take big dirty craps like bears in the mountains, but it's all washed away to convenient supervised sewers, and nobody thinks of crap any more or realizes that their origin is shit and civet and scum of the sea. They spend all day washing their hands with creamy soaps they secretly want to eat in the bathroom. He had a million ideas. He had 'em all. We got to his little shack as it grew dark, and you could smell wood smoke and smoke of leaves in the air, and packed everything up neat, and went down the street to meet Henry Morley, who had the car. Henry Morley was a bespectacled fellow of great learning, but an eccentric himself, more eccentric and outre than Jaffe on the campus, a librarian with few friends, but a mountain climber. His own little one-room cottage in a back lawn of Berkeley was filled with books and pictures of mountain climbing, and scattered all over with rucksacks, climbing boots, skis. I was amazed to hear him talk. He talked exactly like Reinhold Cacoethes, the critic. It turned out they'd been friends long ago and climbed mountains together, and I couldn't tell whether Morley had influenced Cacoethes or the other way around. I felt it was Morley who had done the influencing. He had the same snide, sarcastic, extremely witty, well-formulated speech, with thousands of images. Like when Jaffe and I walked in, there was a gathering of Morley's friends in there, a strange, outlandish group, including one Chinese and one German from Germany, and several other students of some kind. Morley said, I'm bringing my air mattress. You guys can sleep on that hard, cold ground if you want, but I'm going to have pneumatic aid besides. I went and spent $16 on it in the wilderness of Oakland, Army-Navy stores, and drove around all day wondering if, with roller skates or suction cups, you can technically call yourself a vehicle, or some such to me incomprehensible, to everybody else secret meaning joke of his own, to which nobody listened much anyway. He kept talking and talking as though to himself, but I liked him right away. We sighed when we saw the huge amount of junk he wanted to take on the climb, even canned goods, and besides his rubber air mattress, a whole lot of pickaxe and whatnot equipment we'd really never need. You can carry that axe, Morley, but I don't think we'll need it. But canned goods is just a lot of water you have to lug on your back. Don't you realize we got all the water we want waiting for us up there? Well, I just thought a can of this Chinese chop suey would be kind of tasty. I've got enough food for all of us. Let's go. Morley spent a long time talking and fishing around and getting together his unwieldy packboard, and finally we said goodbye to his friends and got into Morley's little English car and started off about 10 o'clock toward Tracy and up to Bridgeport, from where we would drive another 8 miles to the foot of the trail at the lake. I sat in the back seat and they talked up front. Morley was an actual madman who would come and get me later, carrying a quart of eggnog, expecting me to drink that. But I'd make him drive me to the liquor store, and the whole idea was to go out and see some girl, and he'd have me come along to act as a pacifier of some kind. We came to her door. She opened it. When she saw who it was, she slammed the door, and we drove back to the cottage. Well, what was this? Well, it's a long story, Morley would say vaguely. I never quite understood what he was up to. Also, seeing Alva had no spring bed in the cottage. One day he appeared like a ghost in a doorway as we were innocently getting up and brewing coffee, and presented us with a huge double bed spring that, after he left, we struggled to hide in the barn. And he'd bring odd assorted boards and whatnot, and impossible bookshelves, all kinds of things. And years later, I had further Three Stooges adventures with him, going out to his house in Contra Costa, which he owned and rented, and spending impossible to believe afternoons when he paid me $2 an hour for hauling out bucket after bucket of mud slime, which he himself was doling out of a flooded cellar by hand, black and mud-covered as Tartilawak, the king of the mud slimes of Paratio Aloakak span, with a secret grin of elfish delight on his face. And later, returning through some little town and wanting ice cream cones, we walked down Main Street, had hiked on the highway with buckets and rakes, with ice cream cones in our hands, knocking into people on the little sidewalks like a couple of old-time Hollywood silent film comedians, whitewash and all. An extremely strange person anyway, in any case, any old way you looked at it, and drove the car now out toward Tracy on the busy four-laner highway, and did most of the talking. At everything Jaffe said, he had 12 to say, and it went like this. Jaffe would say something like, "By God, I feel real studious lately. I think I'll read some ornithology next week." Morley would say, "Who doesn't feel studious when he doesn't have a girl with a Riviera suntan?" Every time he said something, he would turn and look at Jaffe and deliver these rather brilliant inanities with a complete deadpan. I couldn't understand what kind of strange, secret, scholarly, linguistic clown he really was under these California skies. Or Jaffe would mention sleeping bags, and Morley would ramble in with a, "I'm going to be the possessor of a pale blue French sleeping bag, lightweight, goose down. Goodbye, I think. Find 'em in Vancouver. Good for Daisy May. Completely wrong type for Canada. Everyone wants to know if her grandfather was an explorer who met an Eskimo. I'm from the North Pole myself. What's he talking about? I'd ask from the back seat, and Jaffe, he's just an interesting tape recorder. I'd told the boys I had a touch of from both labadus, blood clots in the veins in my feet, and was afraid about tomorrow's climb. Not that it would hobble me, but would get worse when we came down. Morley said, is thrombophlebitis a particular rhythm for piss? Or I'd say something about Westerners, and he'd say, I'm a dumb Westerner. Look what preconceptions have done to England. You're crazy, Morley. I don't know, maybe I am. But if I am, I'll leave a lovely will anyway. Then out of nowhere he would say, well, I'm very pleased to go climbing with two poets. I'm going to write a book myself. It'll be about Ragusa, a late medieval maritime city-state republic which solved the class problem, offered the secretaryship to Machiavelli, and for a generation had its language used as the diplomatic one for the Levant. This was because of pull with the Turks, of course. Of course, we'd say. So he'd ask himself the question out loud, can you secure Christmas with an approximation only 18 million seconds left of the original old red chimney? Sure, says Jaffe, laughing. Sure, says Morley, wheeling the car around increasing curves. They're boarding reindeer greyhound specials for pre-season heart-to-heart happiness conference deep in Sierra wilderness, 10,560 yards from a primitive motel. It's newer than analysis and deceptively simple. If you lost the round-trip ticket, you can become a gnome. The outfits are cute, and there's a rumor that Actors' Equity conventions sop up the overflow bounced from the Legion. Either way, of course, Smith, turning to me in the back, and in finding your way back to the emotional wilderness, you're bound to get a present from someone. Will some maple syrup help you feel better? Sure, Henry. And that was Morley. Meanwhile, the car began climbing into the foothills somewhere, and we came to sundry sullen towns where we stopped for gas, and nothing but blue-jeaned Elvis Presleys in the road waiting to beat somebody up, but down beyond them the roar of fresh creeks, and the feel of the high mountains not far away. A pure, sweet night, and finally we got out on a real narrow tar country road and headed up toward the mountains, for sure. Tall pine trees began to appear at the side of the road and occasional rock cliffs. The air felt nippy and grand. This also happened to be the opening eve of the hunting season, and in a bar where we stopped for a drink, there were many hunters in red caps and wool shirts, looking silly, getting loaded, with all their guns and shells in their cars, and eagerly asking us if we'd seen any deer or not. We had, certainly, seen a deer, just before we came to the bar. Morley had been driving and talking, saying, well, Ryder, maybe you'll be Alfred Lord Tennyson of our little tennis party here on the coast. They'll call you the new Bohemian, and compare you to the Knights of the Round Table minus Amadis the Great, and the extraordinary splendors of the little Moorish kingdom that was sold round to Ethiopia for 17,000 camels and 1,600 foot soldiers when Caesar was sucking on his mummy's teat. And suddenly the deer was in the road, looking at our headlamps, petrified, before leaping into the shrubbery by the side of the road and disappearing into the sudden vast diamond silence of the forest, which we heard as Morley cut the motor, and just the scuffle of its hoofs running off to the haven of the raw fish Indian up there in the mists. It was real country we were in, Morley said, about 3,000 feet now. We could hear creeks rushing coldly below on cold starlit rocks without seeing them. "Hey, little dear," I'd yelled to the animal, "don't worry. We won't shoot you." Now in the bar, where we'd stopped at my insistence, in this kinda cold northern up mountain country, ain't nothing better for a man's soul at midnight but a good warm glass of warmin' red port, heavy as the syrups of Sir Arthur. "Okay, Smith," said Jaffe, "but seems to me we shouldn't drink on a hiking trip." "Ah, who gives a damn?" "Okay, but look at all the money we saved by buying cheap dried foods for this weekend, and all you're going to do is drink it right down." "That's the story of my life, rich or poor, and mostly poor, and truly poor." We went in the bar, which was a roadhouse all done up in the up-country mountain style, like a Swiss chalet, with moose heads and designs of deer on the booths, and the people in the bar itself an advertisement for the hunting season, but all of them loaded, a weaving mass of shadows at the dim bar as we walked in and sat at 3 stools and ordered the port. The port was a strange request in the whiskey country of hunters, but the bartender rousted up an odd bottle of Christian Brothers port and poured us 2 shots in wide wineglasses. Morley, a teetotaler, actually, and Jaffe, and I drank it and felt it fine. "Ah," said Jaffe, warming up to his wine and midnight, "soon I'm going back north to visit my childhood wet woods and cloudy mountains and old bitter intellectual friends and old drunken logger friends. By God, Ray, you ain't lived till you been up there with me or without. And then I'm going to Japan and walk all over that hilly country, finding ancient little temples hidden and forgotten in the mountains, and old sages 109 years old praying to Kwannon in huts and meditating so much that when they come out of meditation they laugh at everything that moves. But that don't mean I don't love America, by God, though I hate these damn hunters. All they want to do is level a gun at a helpless sentient being and murder it. For every sentient being or living creature these actual pricks kill, they will be reborn 1,000 times to suffer the horrors of samsara, and damned good for 'em, too. Hear that, Morley? Henry, what do you think?" My Buddhism is nothing but a mild, unhappy interest in some of the pictures they've drawn, though I must say sometimes Cocoethes strikes a nutty note of Buddhism in his mountain climbing poems, though I'm not much interested in the belief part of it. In fact, it didn't make a goddamn much of a difference to him. "I'm neutral," said he, laughing happily, with a kind of an eager, slaking leer. And Jaffe yelled, "Neutral is what Buddhism is." "Well, that port'll make you have to swear off yogurt. You know I'm a fortiori disappointed because there's no Benedictine or Trappist wine, only Christian Brothers holy waters and spirits around here. Not that I feel very expansive about being here in this curious bar anyway. It looks like the home plate for Chiardi and breadloaf writers. Armenian grocers, all of 'em, well-meaning awkward Protestants who are on a group excursion for a binge and want to but don't understand how to insert the contraception. These people must be assholes," he added in a sudden straight revelation. "The milk around here must be fine, but more cows than people. This must be a different race of Anglos up here. I don't particularly warm up to their appearance. The fast kids around here must go 34 miles. Well, Jaffe," said he, concluding, "if you ever get an official job, I hope you get a Brooks Brothers suit. Hope you don't wind up in artsy-fartsy parties where it would say, as some girls walked in, young hunters must be why the baby wards are open all year. But the hunters didn't like us to be huddled there, talking close and friendly in low voices about sundry personal topics, and joined us, and pretty soon it was a long, funny harangue up and down the oval bar about deer in the locality, where to go climb, what to do, and when they heard we were out in this country, not to kill animals, but just to climb mountains, they took us to be hopeless eccentrics and left us alone. Jaffe and I had 2 wines and felt fine, and went back in the car with Morley, and we drove away, higher and higher, the trees taller, the air colder, climbing, till finally it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning, and they said we had a long way to go yet to Bridgeport and the foot of the trail, so we might as well sleep out in these woods in our sleeping bags and call it a day. We'll get up at dawn and take off. Meanwhile, we have this good brown bread and cheese, too, said Jaffe, producing it. Brown bread and cheese he'd thrown in at the last minute in his little shack. And that'll make a fine breakfast, and we'll save the bulgur and goodies for our breakfast tomorrow morning at 10,000 feet. Fine. Still talking and all, Morley drove the car a little way over some hard pine needles under an immense spread of natural park trees, firs and ponderosas, 100 feet high, some of them, a great quiet starlit grove with frost on the ground and dead silence, except for occasional little ticks of sound in the thickets where maybe a rabbit stood petrified, hearing us. I got out my sleeping bag and spread it out and took off my shoes, and just as I was sighing happily and slipping my stockinged feet into my sleeping bag and looking around gladly at the beautiful tall trees, thinking, what a night of true sweet sleep this will be, what meditations I can get into in this intense silence of nowhere, Jaffe yelled at me from the car. Say, it appears Mr. Morley has forgotten his sleeping bag. What? Well, now what? They discussed it a while, fiddling with flashlights in the frost, and then Jaffe came over and said, You'll have to crawl out of there, Smith. All we have is 2 sleeping bags now, and gotta zip 'em open and spread 'em out to form a blanket for 3. God damn it, that'll be cold. What? And the coat'll slip in around the bottoms. Well, Henry can't sleep in that car. He'll freeze to death. No heater. But God damn it, I was all ready to enjoy this so much. I whined, getting out and putting on my shoes, and pretty soon Jaffe had fixed the 2 sleeping bags on top of ponchos and was already settled down to sleep, and on toss it was me had to sleep in the middle, and it was way below freezing by now, and the stars were icicles of mockery. I got in and lay down, and Morley, I could hear the maniac blowing up his ridiculous air mattress so he could lay beside me. But the moment he'd done so, he started at once to turn over and heave and sigh, and around the other side, and back toward me, and around the other side, all under the ice-cold stars and loveliness, while Jaffe snored, Jaffe who wasn't subjected to all the mad wiggling. Finally, Morley couldn't sleep at all, and got up and went to the car, probably to talk to himself in that mad way of his, and I got a wink of sleep. But in a few minutes he was back, freezing, and got under the sleeping bag blanket, but started to turn and turn again, even curse once in a while, or sigh, and this went on for what seemed to be eternities, and the first thing I knew, Aurora was paling and eastern hems of Amida, and pretty soon we'd be getting up anyway. That mad Morley. And this was the only beginning of the misadventures of the most remarkable man, as you'll see now, that remarkable man who was probably the only mountain climber in the history of the world who forgot to bring his sleeping bag. Jesus, I thought. Why didn't he just forget his dreary air mattress instead? Chapter 7. From the very first moment we met Morley, he'd kept emitting sudden yodels in keeping with our venture. This was a simple yodel-hee, but it came at the oddest moments and in oddest circumstances, like several times when his Chinese and German friends were still around, then later in the car, sitting with us enclosed, yodel-hee, and then, as we got out of the car to go in the bar, yodel-hee. Now, as Jaffe woke up and saw it was dawn and jumped out of the bags and ran to gather firewood and shutter over a little preliminary fire. Morley woke up from his nervous small sleep of dawn, yawned and yelled, yodel-hee, which echoed toward vales in the distance. I got up too. It was all we could do to hold together. The only thing to do was hop around and flap your arms like mad, and my sad bum on the gone on the south coast. But soon Jaffe got more logs on the fire, and it was a roaring bonfire that we turned our backs to after a while and yelled and talked. A beautiful morning. Red, pristine shafts of sunlight coming in over the hill and slanting down into the cold trees like cathedral light, and the mists rising to meet the sun, and all the way around the giant secret roar of tumbling creeks, probably with films of ice in the pools. Great fishing country. Pretty soon I was yelling yodel-hee myself, but when Jaffe went to fetch more wood, and we couldn't see him for a while, and Morley yelled yodel-hee, Jaffe answered back with a simple who, which he said was the Indian way to call in the mountains, and much nicer. So he began to yell, who. So I began to yell, who, myself. Then we got in the car and started off. We ate the bread and cheese. No difference between the Morley of this morning and the Morley of last night, except his voice, as he rattled on, yakking in the cultured, snide, funny way of his, was sort of cute with that morning freshness, like the way people's voices sound after getting up early in the morning, something faintly wistful and hoarse and eager in it, ready for a new day. Soon the sun was warm. The black bread was good. It had been baked by Sean Monahan's wife. Sean, who had a shack in Corte Madera, we could all go live in free of rent some day. The cheese was sharp cheddar, but it didn't satisfy me much, and when we got out into country with no more houses and anything, I began to yearn for a good old hot breakfast, and suddenly after we'd gone over a little creek bridge, we saw a merry little lodge by the side of the road, under tremendous juniper trees, with smoke boiling out of the chimney, and neon signs outside, and a sign in the window advertising pancakes and hot coffee. Let's go in there, by God. We need a man's breakfast if we're gonna climb all day. Nobody complained about my idea, and we went in and sat at booths, and a nice woman took our orders with that cheery loquaciousness of people in the back country. Well, you boys going hunting this morning? No, said Jaffe. Just climbing Matterhorn. Matterhorn? Why, I wouldn't do that if somebody paid me $1,000. Meanwhile, I went out to the log johns out back and washed from water in the tap, which was delightfully cold and made my face tingle when I drank some of it, and it was like cool liquid ice in my stomach, and sat there real nice. And I had more. Shaggy dogs were barking in the golden red sunlight slanting down from the 100-foot branches of the firs and ponderosas. I could see snow-capped mountains glittering in the distance. One of them was Matterhorn. I went in, and the pancakes were ready, hot and steaming, and poured syrup over my 3 pats of butter, and cut them up, and slurped hot coffee and ate. So did Henry and Jaffy. For once, no conversation. Then we washed it all down with that incomparable cold water as hunters came in hunting boots and wool shirts, but no giddy drunk hunters, but serious hunters, ready to go out there after breakfast. There was a bar adjoining, but nobody cared about alcohol this morning. We got in the car, crossed another creek bridge, crossed a meadow with a few cows and log cabins, and came out on a plain which clearly showed Matterhorn rising the highest, most awful looking of the jagged peaks to the south. "There she is," said Morley, real proud. "Isn't it beautiful? Doesn't it remind you of the Alps? I've got a collection of snow-covered mountain photos you should see sometime." "I like the real thing myself," said Jaffy, looking seriously at the mountains, and in that far-off look in his eyes, that secret self-sigh, I saw he was back home again. Bridgeport is a little sleepy town, curiously New England-like on that plain. 2 restaurants, 2 gas stations, a school, all sidewalking Highway 395, as it comes through there, running down from Bishop Way up to Carson City, Nevada.